premise that the Dravidian languages are different from Sanskrit, or they do not have any connection with the Sanskrit, is basically flawed.
Oh, it is totally flawed. And I would go further than that. I would suggest that the whole idea of deriving languages from a common source is flawed. We know from the study of American Indian languages and also the Indian languages in northeast part of India that languages come about by coming together of different dialects and languages. They don't branch out from a common source. That's not true. You see, for example, today, there is greater uniformity of the spoken language like Kannada or Hindi than there was 40 years ago. That's because of television, radio and all that. So the more primitive a society is, the greater the diversity of languages. So there could not have been any period where there was a single language
which spawned many
of them. That has never happened. Look at English. After the Norman conquest, the Norman French combined with existing Anglo and Saxon languages and gradually became English.
So from this we could probably derive that using linguistics as the single mode of analysis or historical study is also flawed.
Oh, it's completely flawed. It is completely flawed. Linguistics has not been altogether successful. You see, there are different branches of linguistics. You have descriptive linguistics, specialized, which was pioneered by Panini, which is effective for the study of a particular type of language. You have computational linguistics, which is useful. Okay, and then you have generative grammar, production, various things that we use in computational logic and all that, which are useful. But we are talking about philology, which is comparative linguistics based. And if it is useful in a comparative study of languages, I have no argument with it. But to say that should be the arbiter of historical studies, I think is outlandish. We cannot accept that. Especially when we have so much science available now, which was not there 200 years ago.
That brings me actually to the next question, where in your books you have used very modern methods and techniques of approaching the study of ancient history, especially used DNA, or you have used reference materials in DNA studies. You have used geological studies, satellite imagery. You have used linguistics to some extent, and climate change, which we discussed a little while back. So, so how has all this evolved to help the science? Study of history has become more of a science now than basically conjecture or study of arts or subject of arts anymore.
No, I think it is still only supplementary. And what we should, for example, you refer to my book Sarasvati River and the Vedic Civilization, which came out in 2006.
Right.
This was essentially a summary of the previous approaches and the beginning of the ecological or natural history. So in my next project, which is a 4-volume work called A People's History of India, Indian Civilization, the first volume will be on the origin and growth of the Vedic civilization. And I'm calling it From Natural History to History. That means we look at history as an extension of natural history. So that is, so this is the culmination of the old phase where we used archaeology and where we reduced the importance of linguistics, where we gave an archaeological and symbolic interpretation of and unified Vedic and Harappan civilizations. And that culminated in the Sarasvati River civilization, which is the Harappan, and the Vedic civilization, which is also a Sarasvati civilization. So the next will be to start. It took us to the beginning of the study of the ecology, particularly natural history and genetics. We are going to take that as the starting point to write the history of the Vedic origins. So that, I think, will be the next phase. But I would like to get younger people involved in that. Okay, because obviously they should be trained, and that's what I'm going to do. That's going to be my next project. Frawley essentially highlighted that there is a separation between archaeology and literature. Literature is attributed to the Vedic people, archaeology to another people. They both came from the same place and totally different people. How is that possible? So that's the paradox. Archaeology, so you have an archaeology which has no literature, and you have a vast literature, the Vedic, which has no archaeology. And at the same time, the people were claiming the Vedic people didn't know how to write, so they were illiterate. We know the Harappan people were literate because they had you can see the script and we have read it. Okay, so you have an illiterate people producing a vast literature and no archaeology. You have the literate people producing a great deal of archaeology but no literature. So that, in a slightly elaborated form, is what we have called what I call Freud's paradox.
From this, we will go into a topic which probably is two-layered, multi-layered, or rather two-layered. One part is the fact that I know you have been working with the late Professor Natwar Shah in deciphering the Indus seals, and you have had success in doing that, which has hitherto has been a failure for others.
Shah deserves most of the credit. Yeah, I should say. I organized it. Yeah.
And on the other side, there is the connection between the decipherment of the language that you deciphered is very closely linked to Sanskrit.
It is Sanskrit. So, it's a late Vedic Sanskrit.
Right. Yeah. And the approach that you have taken is which is dramatically opposite to the others.
Correct.
So could you probably answer these two questions?
You see, first, of course, you have been reading any script. I'll get to the importance of it not so much later. In reading any script or any inscriptions, you need two things. First, you must know what the language is, and then you must somehow be able to read the writing. Without knowing the language, you cannot read it. Okay? This is particularly the case because in older languages, the vowel systems were not so well developed. For example, without knowing any French, you can read French, you may not be able to understand it. Similarly, if you can read Devanagari, you can read Marathi even if you don't know the language, even if you just know Hindi. But that's not possible with scripts of this kind. So we used indirect methods, I did primarily, which I assumed it, to demonstrate two things. That one, the language had to be Sanskrit of the Sutra period. That by diverse Sutra period means the sutras came after the Brahmanas, more or less contemporary with the Upanishads. Yeah. So the language is close to Upanishads. From that, so we had that. After that, we made a comparison with the Brahmi, and gradually we were able to fill in the details. So it is not as advanced as the later, like the Brahmi script, but it's more primitive than that. Mm-hmm. But it's more advanced than its contemporaries to the West, like the Sumerian and all that. So it is essentially a proto-alphabetical system from which Brahmi could have evolved. We will discuss it in more detail in my next book. But as to the importance of it, I feel that it has not been as important as we thought. It seems that way because a huge amount of speculation had been created. Other people failed more than technical reasons. You see, no matter what says, there are no experts in reading, deciphering scripts because there are not enough of them to get practice. So each one has to be approached on an individual basis. It's a combination of luck and hard work. Jha worked on it for 20 years. I worked on it for about 10 years. So the fact is, most of the writing on the Harappan scripts is about 4, 5, 6 characters long. So it is like looking at postage stamps. Okay? For example, if you look at all the postage stamps in India over the last 50 or 60 years, that will give you an idea of who are the important people, important events, the Olympics, somebody won a test match, this kind of information. But at best, it can supplement the literary records from the last 50 years. That is the approach we are taking now. My dear friend Dr. Jha is dead now, but his inspiration still remains. And we both came to the conclusion that at best our deciphered readings can supplement and support the interpretation of the vast body of literature that we already have from the same period. So it relates the literature to the archaeology. So the history can be constructed from the literature. And another very important thing which Jaw did, which Frawley, for example, feels is even more important than his reading of the script, is the interpretation of the symbolism of the Harappan cities, the iconography. That Frawley is writing a book on that subject.